Here we go. Once again, I, Ajay Jha, on behalf of ACS India team, welcome you to today's ACS Science Talk session. Just to update you on the upcoming ACS Science Talk, please visit our ACS in India webpage and register for the upcoming sessions. We have also uploaded the past lecture recordings on the ACS Science Talk virtual library. Feel free to like, share among the scientific community and go through these. To keep you updated with the breakthrough research, product launches at ACS, we have a monthly newsletter, ACS Insights India. Subscribe today for free and enjoy reading. To begin with the scientific session, it's an honor and pleasure to introduce Dr. Julie Zimmerman. Dr. Julie Zimmerman obtained a BS in Civil Environmental Engineering at the University of Virginia and MS in Environmental and Water Resources and a dual doctoral degree from the University of Michigan. In addition to her joint appointments as a professor in the Department of Chemical and Environmental Engineering and School of Forestry and Environmental Studies at Yale University, she recently testified before the US House of Representatives Committee on Science, Space, and Technology on the Sustainable Chemistry Research and Development Act of 2019. Her pioneering work established the fundamental framework for her field with a seminal publication on the 12 principles of green engineering in 2003. She is the recipient of several awards and honors, to name a few: Walter L. Huber Civil Engineering Research Prize by American Society of Civil Engineering, Carmen Fellow, RWTH Aachen University, Germany, elected member of Connecticut Academy of Science and Engineering, United States Environmental Protection Agency Star Fellow, and many more. Currently, she serves as the editor-in-chief of the ACS journal Environmental Science and Technology. Today, she'll be sharing with us her wisdom on designing a green chemistry future.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really honored and excited to be here today to talk to you both about the Journal of Environmental Science and Technology, as well as about some of my own research that I do here at Yale University on green chemistry and green engineering. So Environmental Science and Technology is the flagship journal for the American Chemical Society on environmental sciences and engineering. We cover a broad range of topics related to the environment. We have an amazing editorial team who span the globe, so well represented, and we are continuing to work on including more and more diversity and different perspectives and different disciplines within the editorial team. So we have recently expanded the editorial advisory board to include 75 members from 21 different countries in this effort to ensure that ES&T continues to be a global leader in the work that we're doing and represents the broad community of environmental work happening internationally. The journal is 55 years old and was founded in 1967. Again, it is published by the American Chemical Society, and it is the leading global journal in its field. The inaugural editor-in-chief for ES&T in 1967 was Professor James Morgan. We recently lost him, but he, in the first editorial in the first issue of ES&T, laid out a strong vision for the journal that still resonates today. And it talked not only about the importance of the science we're doing, but why we do that science. And it was to benefit society. And so we use that and continue to use that as our true north, our compass in the kind of work that we're doing through the journal. That not only do we want to publish the best science in terms of novelty and impact and relevance, but that it does have a direct benefit for policy and decision making in terms of environmental protection. The journal covers, as I mentioned, many topics. These are the scope areas right now covered. So if you submit a manuscript to the journal, you're asked to select which one of these headings your research would fit under. So this is anthropogenic impacts on the atmosphere, biogeochemical cycling, contaminants in aquatic and terrestrial environments, data science, which is a new topic for us and one we expect to grow significantly in the coming years, ecotoxicology and public health, energy and climate, sustainable systems, and treatment and resource recovery. The journal accepts many different types of manuscripts. So in addition to traditional research articles, We're also interested in having dialogue and conversation with the ES&T community. And this often happens through other manuscript types. These other types are actually tend to be more highly cited than our traditional research articles because of the nature of the content. So these papers, such as critical reviews, perspectives, policy analysis, features, and viewpoints, give an opportunity for authors to step away from lab-based or field-based work and instead talk about where the field is going, what is the cutting edge, what are potentially controversial topics that the field will have to tackle in the future. And so this is really a hallmark of ES&T in terms of showing our leadership within the environmental community, is to not only publish the research, but to allow for dialogue and conversation within the community. ES&T is the most cited journal in environmental sciences and environmental engineering, with over 187,000 citations last year in 2019. And the top submitting nations, you can see a breakdown here of where we tend to get papers from. So in 2019, a large representative of the submissions came from East Asia and the Pacific, and growing in the Middle East and Africa, as well as South Asia. And the impact factor for the journal continues to increase, demonstrating again the importance of the work that's being published in ES&T. And so for 2019, the impact factor for the journal was 7.8. ES&T, environmental science and technology, because of the kind of work that we do and its relevance to protecting human health and the environment, is often covered by popular media. So this is from newspapers to science blogs to trade association journals who are picking up research or those other types of articles that are published in ES&T and highlighting them and bringing them out into the public domain. So this is a really exciting opportunity for our authors and for our community to see the direct impact and relevance of their work. The journal does give several annual awards. The first one focused on Early Career Award. And so this rotates around the globe to different regions on an annual basis. This year, the regional award was in North America. And so we actually awarded 4 different winners of the Morgan Early Career Award. And these award winners will be presenting at a session in the upcoming ACS Spring National Meeting. We have a new award that the journal launched in 2021. Again, it's a regional award that will move around the globe on an annual basis. This year it was in the Asia Pacific region, and it was almost the opposite end of the Early Career Award, but to present an Outstanding Achievement Award for a lifetime of work in environmental science and technology. And so this year we recognize Professor Xu Tao and Professor Guibin Jiang for their work and that had been published in their service to ES&T. ES&T also gives annual awards for the best research paper. And so every year the journal publishes an issue highlighting and acknowledging the best papers, whether it's science, technology, policy, or one of those feature type articles, one of those articles that is more about the leadership and the cutting edge of the field instead of primary data. And we also, of course, owe a tremendous debt of gratitude to our reviewers. And one of the ways that we say thank you is with the annual reviewer awards. So the issue, I think 2 issues ago, the cover was to acknowledge the work of the reviewing community for ES&T. This is so important to the journal, to the brand, to the quality of science that's published. And I think, again, as a hallmark of ES&T is that your work will be well considered and carefully reviewed by the community and given really robust feedback. So if there is a need to revise or improve your manuscript, lots of good ideas come from the reviewers in helping our authors achieve the best quality paper they can. We also this year ran a number of virtual issues. So this is collecting work that had already been published in ES&T and then putting a new cover, maybe some new front matter to it, and then publishing it as a virtual issue. So given everything going on with COVID-19 and the pandemic, we collected all the work that we had in the journal on enveloped viruses and did a virtual issue on that. We also recently put together a virtual issue on sustainability, and that's what I'll be talking about today, of the work published in ES&T. And then this year was the 50th anniversary of the United States Environmental Protection Agency. And ES&T has a long history with the Environmental Protection Agency. And so we collected work that was seminal to the field and contributed by authors who had an affiliation with the Environmental Protection Agency. And so that virtual issue is also available. And then we have many upcoming special issues. So this is, rather than collecting previously published work, is to collect new work, invited or open call, and to put those together, and again to put some front matter and editorial or perspective about the significance of this work, why this collection is being put together, and then producing a special issue of the journal focused on different topics. So again, new work related to the environmental transmission and control of COVID-19, and that special issue will be out very soon. And then some acknowledgements and tribute issues to folks who are very eminent scholars in the field, both Professor Jones and then, as I mentioned, Jim Morgan, our first editor-in-chief, who passed away last year. We have an ongoing special issue related to nanofertilizers, and then an upcoming one that will be open for fluorinated compounds and the emergence, treatment, characterization, and monitoring of fluorinated compounds in the environment. So, of course, and I'm sure we'll get some questions about this later, but some of the questions that we get about why a paper wasn't published, and I will also point you to a recent editorial that we did as an editorial team, so that all of the associate editors signed on to this editorial called "Why Was My Paper Rejected?" And so it's a great read. It gives a lot of good pointers and ideas about how to have a manuscript that's successful at ES&T. Some of the most common reasons that papers are not published in ES&T have to do with them being out of scope. And this is largely due to interesting new science or new materials, or the discovery of a new catalyst, or a new treatment technology, but it's not demonstrated in environmentally relevant conditions. And so for us as ES&T, one of the most important features of the work that we do is it is directly relevant or has a significance for the environment. And so if you have a new catalyst and you're showing it only on deionized water, that's not something our journal would be interested in publishing. Always, we're looking for the most novel work, the most impactful work. We also wrote an editorial this year called "Making Waves." I would also point you to that editorial as an indication of the kind of papers we like. If we use that metaphor of waves dispersing energy around the globe, changing the landscape, causing ripples in other directions, that's the kind of research we'd like to publish. And then, of course, issues that would be true for any journal, not just our own, but looking for rigor, looking for high English quality, looking for papers that are of broad interest. As I mentioned, ES&T is a global publication, and so we're very interested that the papers we publish are appealing and of interest to that broad global community. So results that are found in a region or in a case study that are not transferable or generalizable are probably not something that would be successful in ES&T. Okay, so if you have any questions about the journal, please be in touch. I'm also happy to answer questions after I give my talk. The email there is for our managing editor, and email address is there, and then of course the website for the journal. And with that, I'm going to pivot over and start talking a little bit about my research and the work that I do when I'm not spending time being editor-in-chief of ES&T. So I'm going to talk to you today about designing a green chemistry future. So we as scientists, as engineers, and probably more as engineers than scientists, are often asked to come in when there's a problem and develop a solution. That's what we do. We're problem solvers. And we have been doing this for a long time to meet societal needs. So engineers, whether it's transportation or wastewater, automation and robotics, telecommunications, artificial intelligence, right? We come in, there's a problem we're given to address, and then we design, develop, test, and produce solutions to meet societal needs. So what's been happening if we need to talk about the need to move to a more sustainable future, a green chemistry future, thinking about the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? And that is, I would argue, we have largely gotten the problem statements wrong when we've been asked to come in and develop solutions. So we had been asked as environmental engineers to come in and provide clean water, but nobody added the bit that we shouldn't do it using toxic chemicals like chlorine. Engineers may have been come in and scientists have been invited in to help generate energy and electricity for society, but we forgot to add the part that we want to do that without altering Earth's atmosphere. We were asked to produce goods and services and think about manufacturing and supply chains, but we never were asked to add in the condition that we shouldn't deplete finite resources or generate waste as we do these things. And you could go on with any problem statement engineers and scientists have been working to solve, whether it's growing food or providing healthcare, or the albeit chase to go after efficiency. And so if we got the problem statement wrong, then we came up with a solution that solved the problem we were given, but didn't really lead to a more sustainable future. So we really need to develop solutions to societal needs in ways that are conducive to life. And they have to be conducive to life today and into the future. So not only this generation, but avoiding multi-generational effects. This requires changing the inherent nature of our material and energy sources. So the US National Academies of Sciences and the National Research Council has done a lot of work. And I've served on numerous committees there thinking about how do we change the very nature of the materials and energy that we're using to fulfill society's needs. So we need solutions that are renewable and not depleting, that are healthful and not toxic, and that are restorative and not degrading. And so this means we need to rewrite the problem statement, but it's also the same way we're going to get our solutions right. And that is by coupling reductionism, our traditional approach of understanding and studying phenomena, with systems thinking. So this is not a new idea. This paper was published in the journal Science in 1972 by a Nobel laureate, Paul Anderson, who said more is different. And he talked about the need to not only understand isolated variables and parameters and controlled systems, but to understand the system, the feedback loops, the interconnections. And he said the main problem with reductionist thinking is that we can't reduce everything to simple fundamental laws and then try to reconstruct the system from there. And we're learning that now in terms of the systemic effects we're seeing and the interconnections between our food systems, our energy systems, our water systems. There are many different approaches to thinking in systems, and this is, again, a coupling with how we do our traditional science, but thinking about those interconnections, thinking about what potential feedbacks there might be so that things are not linear, but there are circular, that we don't just consider siloed events or occurrences, but we see what behavior might emerge over time. We think in wholes and how things interact with each other. And this moves us from an analytical framework to a synthetic one so that we can understand relationships and ensure that those things that we're designing, new materials, new catalysts, new treatment technologies, new products, new services, are actually conducive to life, to our natural systems. So if systems thinking is new to you, this is a good way, and a cartoon I like to use to get people to think about it. So this guy is sitting in the chair. He wants to get some more space. He pushes on the wall. And of course, this is often what happens with our engineered solutions, is that we missed some feedback loop and it winds up causing more problems than the one we were solving in the first place. So we can move towards this more sustainable future by coupling reductionism with systems thinking, by coupling innovation and sustainability. That means that we think about sustainability at the very beginning as we start to do our innovation work, our engineering design work. It's important that we couple discovery with development, that there's a path to go to scale with the technologies and the solutions we're putting forward. And so green chemistry and green engineering offer a pathway and a structure and a framework in how to pursue this more sustainable future with these ideas and goals in mind. If we think about today's chemical sector, it's very linear. We're all familiar with this, and it's not just the chemical sector, it's all industrial sectors. It's this idea of taking fossil resources, putting them through a production chain, and at end of life, they often wind up either in the landfill, being incinerated, or dispersed in the environment. So this leads to inefficiencies and a lot of waste generation. One way of measuring how much waste is produced is called the E factor. This was first published by Roger Sheldon I want to say about 25 years ago. And it's just a simple ratio of how many kilograms of waste are generated per kilogram of product we're interested in producing. And so as we move to more specialty, more higher value chemicals, like going from oil refining to pharmaceuticals, we see that the E factor goes up by orders of magnitude. And so this is because there's less incentive in some ways to address the waste because we are generating so much profit from these molecules. It's also speaks to the complexity of the chemistry as we move up the value chain. And so there's simply more waste generated as we go through more synthetic steps. We lean on fossil feedstocks. And when we say fossil, I'm also not only talking about coal and oil and gas, but if we think about rare earth elements, if we think about rainforests and coral reefs and land, right? So this isn't just fossil feedstocks, this is really finite feedstocks that we're relying on for our current system. We use reactive and persistent chemical reagents and products, catalysts that rely on rare metals, and lots of energy and material consuming isolation and purification steps. If we look at the periodic table and where we are, there's been lots of work around the criticality of these elements and which ones, either because of access or because of supply chain or because of demand, are really going to be unavailable to us in the future to go to scale. It would beg the question, should I be pursuing developing water splitting catalysts that rely on ruthenium, for example, if there isn't enough in the world for me to realize that solution at scale? And then, of course, the outcomes of this have to do with how many chemicals are out in the environment and getting into human systems. So one study that came out of the Center for Disease Control here in the US about body burden found over 287 synthetic chemicals in the umbilical cord of newborns. Many of these are known to have health effects. And we know very little about what happens when these chemicals act in combination, in mixtures, and what the different toxicity endpoints might be. Interestingly enough, many of these were not around before 1950, and several of them were banned through regulatory action in the 1970s, and they're still showing up in these human systems. So regulation is part of a solution, but it is not the only solution as we move forward. We need to change the inherent nature of the materials and chemicals that we're using. And then the idea of the amount of waste that we're generating, again, whether it's solid waste in landfills or what we're doing to the Earth's atmosphere, or a picture like this that really speaks for itself. So we have focused designing exclusively for use phase with a reliance on circumstantial controls. That means we've said our main goal is to produce chemicals and molecules that do what they're supposed to do, whether it's an adhesive, a paint color, a surfactant. And we didn't really worry about what end of life was or where those feedstocks came from. And the way most of the world has addressed this is through hazardous waste management and through really kind of controlling how much exposure we can have, whether it's asking researchers to wear lab gloves and goggles and lab coats, or it's about smokestack scrubbers and putting in water treatment systems. We know this leads to accidents and that it is a big concern in terms of the nature of those chemicals, if they are explosive or flammable, the harm that they can cause. And of course, speaking to this audience about the Bhopal disaster. And so we need to look at this idea that if we're going to rely on engineered systems to contain and manage using hazardous, toxic, lethal chemicals, those systems can and will fail. And the only way that we can really minimize or mitigate this risk entirely is to use inherently safer chemicals and materials to start. So we have for a long time done the right things, pursued these goals, but maybe done that in the wrong way. So I'm going to use the example here in the US. It's easiest to pick on our own government. That put forth a renewable fuel standard. So this is an important goal of addressing climate change and moving to more renewable resources, but doing it by mandating that we were going to grow corn and convert that to ethanol. As soon as this policy was put into effect, we saw effects of increased fertilizer and pesticide use. It leads to more eutrophication in the waterways. It was in direct competition with food. And so we saw global food prices and corn commodity prices go up. Land use change as farmers started looking to more marginal lands to convert and grow corn. We also know the issues with monoculture of growing corn. And of course, when somebody finally did the life cycle assessment, we were putting more energy into producing the ethanol than we were getting out burning it in internal combustion engine. And so this was a noble goal and an important thing to pursue, but potentially done in the wrong way. So if we were going to step back and say, what do we want a future chemical sector to look like? What should be the design statement for it? My question would be, how do we keep and greatly expand upon the advances we've had in performance from our chemicals and meeting society's needs, but really limiting or ideally eliminating the detrimental impacts that threaten sustainability? And so this means taking a step from the idea that performance is only about function. Is it a good adhesive? Is it a good pesticide? And moving it to say performance and sustainability are paramount. And so we're only going to go to market or declare something a successful solution if it also addresses sustainability considerations. We do this through the field of green chemistry. This was defined in 1989 by the US EPA and put forward as the design of chemical products and processes to reduce or eliminate the use and generation of hazardous substances. And in this case, hazard doesn't just mean toxicological hazard, but we can think about global hazards like climate change and ozone depletion. And we can also think about physical hazards like flammability, corrosivity, explosivity. So the goal of green chemistry is to design not only our finished molecules, our final products, but also the processes to produce them to avoid these hazardous substances. We recently published a paper called The Green Chemistry. It was 20 years of looking at the field of green chemistry and how it's grown over time. You can zoom in and look at each one of these branches. It's one of the principles of green chemistry. And then each leaf identifies a new technology, a new approach, a new strategy in realizing those goals of green chemistry. And if you look across these branches, it covers almost every industrial sector, from agriculture to energy generation to pharmaceuticals. And these aren't hypothetical examples. These are real case studies and real world examples of green chemistry being put into practice every day. So there are two caveats as we think about how to pursue sustainability that I want to call out. And the first is this goal and pursuit of efficiency that we're all taught. So just do more with less. And the first thing to remember is efficiency will help you do something better, but it's not going to help you do a better thing. So if you already have a process that is toxic, is relying on finite resources, efficiency might help you be a little bit less bad, but it's not going to help you change the inherent nature of those chemicals and materials. And the same second caveat to remember with efficiency is it's not the same thing as effectiveness. And all we have to do is look at Kyoto or in Washington, DC, at the cherry blossoms about this time of year and see that nature is very effective at what it does, but it is not very efficient. As we know, every one of those blossoms is not going to turn into another cherry tree. Another way to think about this is Mozart, and if you're thinking about playing piano, it might be very efficient to take a 2x4 piece of wood and hit the piano and hit every note at once, but it certainly wouldn't be as effective in terms of being beautiful music. So what would tomorrow's chemical sector look like? So we need to move from this linear system to one that is more circular, so closing loops on materials and energy. And we also know we need to introduce more renewable feedstocks and resources into the system. This is happening, these circular processes. Adidas partnered, sneaker company partnered with Parlay to harvest used fishing nets out of the ocean and convert that filament into what they use to make their sneakers going forward. And so trying to close these loops, solving issues of ocean plastics while continuing to reduce products for society. We can move to renewable feedstocks, and I'll put up this figure, but I will point you to our recent paper in the journal Science that really laid out this case for designing a green chemistry future and talks about, while renewable feedstocks are great, and as chemists and engineers, we can pursue and work towards drop-in replacements for current commodity chemicals or specialty chemicals. When we start from bio-based feedstocks, we actually open up new avenues of chemistry because we have new building blocks. And so there are opportunities for new commodity chemicals and new functions that we can't get from a petroleum system. And so as we remember to go after renewable feedstocks, it's important to not just think about how do we replace what's existing today, but how do we really create tomorrow. Closing these loops requires using waste, quote unquote, that is a material or resource that's out of place or doesn't have value in its current system. And we see lots of work going on right now on harvesting and capturing carbon dioxide from power plants, from other industrial streams. And this one company called Carbon Cure is actually capturing and mineralizing CO2 into concrete. This is a really important and exciting advance, especially as we look around the world as development is happening in urbanization and start thinking about that building as a way of helping to solve our climate change problem. And then this idea also that we need to move from performance and being tied to molecules and instead say, we're going to make money by selling services. And so instead of selling you a paint and you own that paint and you have to dispose of whatever's left, I'm going to sell you the service of color on your wall. This changes me as a chemical manufacturer and wanting to make a paint that is really effective, is very efficient, lasts a long time. I don't want to keep selling you more and more product. I want to sell it to you once. I want you to have that service. And so this changes the incentives and the structure in the marketplace. So we don't want to just change the chemicals that we're using. We want to change the business models to ones of chemical leasing rather than chemical sales. So I just have a few more slides to wrap up kind of this overall framework. And so again, I'll point you to the paper for those of you who want to read more. But this is a diagram or a flow chart of thinking about how do I go about doing this. So the first thing when we're trying to come up with a new chemical material product process system is that it provides the function it's intended. Are we fulfilling the societal needs we're interested in? If not, we need to keep redesigning. The next thing we would ask is about depleting resources. If I'm making something and it's from depleting resources, can I redesign it to utilize renewable resources? And my group does a lot of research in the lab on fundamental questions of this. How can I take biomass and convert it into value-added fuels and chemicals, whether this starts from algae or lignin or food waste or plastics waste? And so lots of really interesting chemistry and engineering happening on these systems to recover these waste streams and convert them into usable fuels and chemicals. The next question we would ask is what I'm producing toxic, or am I using toxic chemicals and materials to produce these services and goods? We know risk is a function of hazard and exposure. We know that exposure controls can and do fail. They are engineered systems, and so we need to address risk by addressing hazard. My research group has spent a lot of time over the past 10 years working on design guidelines for safer, molecules through a molecular design research network that was funded by the US government. And so this is really saying to chemists and synthetic organic chemists that these are the kinds of physical chemical properties that are correlated with toxicity. And in fact, we can mechanistically understand why. And so if you're going to make a new molecule, these are the kinds of things you want to avoid as you design that next generation. And then the last thing we think about in this flowchart is really end of life. So what happens to this? What am I designing for? So some things should be designed to be persistent and go into a circular economy, and some things really shouldn't. We're never going to get back soap. We're never going to get pesticides back from the environment. And so those kinds of chemicals and materials should not be designed for a circular economy, but should really be designed to be degradable under environmental conditions, and ideally mineralized back to CO2. So I will put up one of my most recent and exciting developments, and this is a company that is spun out of our Center for Green Chemistry and Green Engineering here at Yale. This is a company that takes carbon dioxide and converts it to ethanol using air and water and sunlight and a catalyst. We're not quite at the cost of making ethanol that's competitive with fuel prices, but you can produce spirits like vodka that sell for about $80 a liter. And so this company is up and running now. During the pandemic, they actually pivoted from making spirits to making hand sanitizer that they donated to doctors and nurses in New York City. And they have recently won an award from NASA to think about if we can take carbon dioxide out of Earth's atmosphere and make chemicals and fuels, can we do the same thing on Mars? And this will actually support the idea of pursuing space exploration and development if we can pursue this approach. And so this is a very exciting development. The other thing that's really exciting about this company is we're producing ethanol. It looks really different than a conventional ethanol plant and is actually based in Brooklyn in New York City, right downtown in this complex called the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And you'll see that this could change the idea of a community actually wanting a chemical plant to locate there because it's economic development, because it's local jobs, and because it's not incongruent with the idea of having a healthy life and a beautiful landscape. So this is the shift that we need to make in terms of the paradigm of moving from what today's chemical sector looks like to tomorrow's. And it is an exciting bit of work and a noble bit of work. And there is a large community of folks all over the world who are pursuing these strategies, and every little bit of different parts of chemistry and engineering on these steps to realize this more sustainable future. So I have to thank a few students in my group who have done some of the work that I showed today. They're fond of making pyramids to take pictures. We also have the large Center for Green Chemistry and Green Engineering at Yale, which is made up of chemists and engineers and folks in public health. I sit across 3 schools at Yale, and so you'll see that reflected in the talk, both our environment school, our engineering school, and our school of management. And then lots of partners around the world that we've worked with on these ideas and these technologies. Always thankful to the sponsors who support our work in the work that we do.